Episode 16. Yes, guys, it's the 16th episode of the Connect the Dots MSC podcast. And this one's just a bit different. To understand homelessness, we need to understand how to create solutions to attack it. And this is where social entrepreneurship comes into play. And the person I interviewed today, well, let's just say she's an expert in it. So without further ado, thank you for joining me today, and let's get started. Teresa Shaheen is a senior lecturer in social entrepreneurship at the Yale School of Management and faculty director of the Social Innovation Initiative at the Yale Jackson School of Global Affairs. Her work bridges academia, public health, and social impact, guiding students and changemakers to turn bold ideas into sustainable solutions. Before joining Yale, Teresa founded Alphanar Lebanon, the country's first venture philanthropy organization, which supported social enterprises, improving education and job opportunities for youth and women. At Yale, she created the Impact and Innovation podcast and launched Creating Change Through Social Entrepreneurship, a free online with Coursera course that expands access to her 10-stage framework for building impact step by step. Teresa is also the author of Social Entrepreneurship, Building Impact Step by Step, an introduction to social entrepreneurship, both widely used around the world. Her most recent projects explore how entrepreneurial women pursue meaning, overcome systemic barriers, and reimagine leadership for a more equitable world. Across all her work, from public health to systems change, Teresa Shaheen challenges us to see entrepreneurship not as a career path, but as a mindset for transforming the systems that shape our lives. Thank you so much for joining me today, Teresa Shaheen.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I um I remember when you reached out on LinkedIn and told me that you took my Coursera course and that you're a student and that you're tackling housing problems. And it's truly a pleasure to connect with you.
I want to start with your origins and your motivation. So, what first drew you to social entrepreneurship, and how did your background in public health shape that journey?
That's an excellent question. And what drew me to social entrepreneurship was my background in public health and what I felt were the shortfallings of my public health education. So I started out doing community-based work in Lebanon, where I come from, and I went back to graduate school in my late 20s to pursue my doctoral degree, where I studied about the social and environmental drivers of health. And 5 years, in my fifth and 5 year of that program, I found myself thinking about next steps and really questioning the path that I had always assumed I would have after graduating, which was to go back to doing the same kind of work that I had been doing in the past in Lebanon, like UN projects with the Ministry of Social Affairs. And two things happened at that time. The first thing is that I felt that those projects that I had been working on were less im- were w- comprised work where I was less likely to see the immediate impact or even the long-term impact of my work. I felt it was really removed from the people facing the problems. The second thing that happened was that I realized that during my time in public health school, I had really been being trained in studying problems, but not necessarily in creating solutions. And that's what I wanted to do. And so I started doing my own reading outside of my schoolwork at the time about how I could make a difference, about people who were presenting different models to creating social change. At the time, and this is like 15 or 20 years ago, um, these included books like The End of Poverty by Jeffrey Sachs, Creating a World Without Poverty by Muhammad Yunus, The Blue Sweater by Jacqueline Novogratz. And those were really all questioning the existing institutions that we use as channels to create change at a societal level. Um, and I started thinking about basically people power, like how citizens could step in and support each other in directly implementing change-making projects. And the day after I defended my dissertation in April 2010, I came to Yale to the Global Health and Innovation Conference, and I pitched an idea I had about restoring environmental damage in Lebanon at the time. And I called it Citizens Environmental Restoration Bank because my idea was like, okay, the World Bank seems broken. How can we create like a bank of like from people to people instead of from government to government? And the feedback I got when I pitched that idea was this this is a good idea, but like this kind of stuff is already out there. People are doing it. There are websites where people can find each other's projects and support each other. It's a thing. It's like a whole sector, and it's called social entrepreneurship. And that's when I realized, like, okay, this is the thing I've been searching for, both in my desire to not only study problems and also create solutions, and also in my desire to see the impact of my work and not just be stuck in a big bureaucracy. And so that's when I decided I need to learn more about social entrepreneurship, talk to people working in social entrepreneurship, and discover what kind of opportunities there are for me to get involved. And in doing so, I spent like at least a year just talking to people while doing research and consultancies to pay the bills. And I ended up connecting with Al Fanar Venture Philanthropy, which was based out of London for fundraising reasons and had been operating in Egypt with the vision of being regional and serving all the Arab countries. So I had the opportunity to help start Al Fanar Lebanon.
Can you take us back to the early days of Alphanar Lebanon? What gap did you see, and what did it take to build the country's first venture philanthropy organization?
So the gap was that people had a mental division between traditional charity, like if you want to help people, you just donate to a charity, and traditional commerce. Like if you want to earn revenue or make money, you just do business. You either care about people or you care about profit, and there's nothing in between or nothing that combines the two. That was one of the gaps. In Lebanon, the government is it's it's basically a failed state. Like it doesn't do the job it's supposed to do. When I was heading Al Fanad Lebanon, one out of every four people in Lebanon was a refugee. One of every three youth would never be employed. Imagine that unemployment rate. Among girls and women, it's double. Two out of three will never be employed. So we had really pressing social problems, and the government was ineffective. And it's really the government who is accountable for these kinds of social problems. The private sector, on the other hand, was very effective. We had a thriving advertising sector, hospitality sector, healthcare sector, lots of for-profit businesses. Um, but they weren't necessarily focused on helping people. On the contrary, oftentimes they would make profit at the expense of people and planet. And so in the middle were some civil society organizations that had the appetite to operate not purely as charities, where like, okay, if you give me this money, I'll help this person, and if you don't, I won't. Um, who had the appetite to create systemic change in terms of improving the education system, not just helping one student at a time, in terms of changing frameworks about women's role in society and how they can participate in decision making and economic productivity, and who had the potential to generate revenue in their programs and were already starting to generate revenue in their programs. Most of them were nonprofits because their costs exceeded their revenue, but at least they had the potential to cover a certain percentage of their costs and be somewhat financially independent so that they could set their agenda and their theory of change and determine their activities to get there and achieve their goals rather than being completely donor driven. So, a huge problem in Lebanon and many similar countries is that everyone's chasing donors. Like, you want widows, we've got widows. You want orphans, we've got orphans. Like, we'll change our programming depending on what the donors want, which is colonialism, right? And so, our approach was to identify social entrepreneurs, backable chief executives of social purpose organizations with proven track records in serving marginalized communities that had that we were able to conduct due diligence on, in the sense that they had systems in place to work with funders and other stakeholders, and yet they had room for growth and improvement where we could offer value. So that was the sweet spot. And we basically we started by scoping those entrepreneurs rather than doing like a call for proposals. Like, we went out and talked to people and tried to find the unusual suspects, not just the people that already had everyone's attention, and then got to know them as organizations and did a pilot with them where we gave them a small grant and worked together to improve certain outcomes, strengthen their theory of change, strengthen their financial model, their business model, etc., and then did a long-term investment. So the model of venture philanthropy is that you do tailored financing and, more importantly, non-financial support. So I became almost like part of every organization we invested in. And in the early days, we chose five. And I helped make decisions and make change, introduce change in the organizations. And we focused on women's socioeconomic empowerment and on education and job creation for youth and women, because those were two areas where there was a great need, and also where there was the great potential for impact through the ripple effects on society. So there were studies from UNESCO and UNICEF and statistics that showed that, for example, for every year a young person stays in school, their future income earning power increases by 10%. Every year it increases by 10%. So imagine the impact that will have on their children's health and education and on future generations. And for women, a woman who's not currently economically productive, when she becomes so, invests 95% in her children's health and education. And so just imagine, like, these are really the places you want to invest if you want to see big social returns and ripple effects. So those were the sectors we started out in, and that was our approach in scoping our first investments. And I did have the opportunity to build. I didn't entirely build from scratch, in the sense that I was receiving funding from the Al Fanar team, who was raising funds in London, which is the hardest part that I don't like doing. But I did have the opportunity to build from scratch in terms of creating a new organization and a new culture of Al Fanad in Lebanon that differed greatly from Egypt. These are two very different countries. Lebanon has a very small population. Egypt has a huge population. Um, in Egypt, the Ministry of Social Affairs is very hands-on in terms of controlling civil society. In Lebanon, civil society really is very thriving and nimble, um, and also most, if not all, of the chief executives, the social entrepreneurs I invested in Lebanon, were women to start. And our advisory board that I formed was also like Lebanon specific. So we had a different culture, and Lebanon is a very entrepreneurial country where people from all sectors want to get involved. So we really wanted to tap not just into the usual charitable donors, but also like business leaders who wanted to infuse civil society with some of the skills and strengths that they have um, to strengthen their impact.
And creating Al Fanar Lebanon and all the time you spent in Lebanon learning about really social entrepreneurship, which you kind of created the idea on your own after defending your dissertation, must have all been a really impactful experience. And so how has your experience growing up and working with Lebanon influenced your view of social innovation and community resilience?
So social entrepreneurship isn't an idea that I created. It definitely was out there for decades, and there were people working on this. And the notion of social entrepreneurship in terms of being entrepreneurial and daring and bold and creative and mobilizing resources for social change, this has been happening since the beginning of humankind. It's just that the language and the frameworks and the pedagogy around it is relatively new. And I always attribute it to like the turn of the millennium, when the Millennium Development Goals, which were the precursors to the Sustainable Development Goals, came out, and the like web bubble in Silicon Valley happened, and there were all these wealthy entrepreneurs, and they wanted to apply the similar approaches that they applied in entrepreneurship to solving social problems. And so that's when like the buzz around social entrepreneurship and the wording came about. Now, in the public health sector and in the Arab countries, that they were slower to adopt this language and this approach. And one of the reasons that I felt that I started teaching social entrepreneurship in public health is that at my alma mater, at the university where I attended graduate school, all of the social enterprise activity and teaching was at the business school. And the president of the World Bank at that time, who himself was a social entrepreneur and one of the founders of Partners in Health, a very impactful organization, went and told the business students, and a classmate of mine was in the audience, and he told them in front of her, we need you to be solving global health problems because public health students don't have the right acumen. And I was like, what? Public health students are the people who have dedicated their lives to serving others, and they can acquire the acumen and the skills and the knowledge to be more entrepreneurial, and the business students can work for them, not the other way around. And same thing in Lebanon. I mean, having the opportunity to go back to where I had studied my undergraduate and high school years and had my first job in the government on a UN project afforded me the opportunity to really tap into what Lebanese people do best as well. Lebanese people are entrepreneurial by nature. Our civil society has propped up our country throughout the Civil War in the 70s and 80s and helped build it in the 90s and early 2000s. And I was part of that. I graduated from college in 2000. Everyone I know was getting a job on a UN project related to the Millennium Development Goals. And um, you know, at that time, you weren't born yet, but we thought that by 2015 we would have eradicated poverty, hunger, and poverty, and preventable maternal child deaths, and solved climate change. And I don't remember what the other two or three were, but like, oh, HIV/AIDS, and like by 2015, all these problems would be gone. Needless to say, they weren't, and that's when we came up with the Sustainable Development Goals. And what I really love about the Sustainable Development Goals, first of all, they doubled the number and more. And then secondly, the 17th, I believe, and final goal is partnership for the goals. And the reason that is so important is because even if we were to hypothetically solve all the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, which we're not, a whole new set of challenges will emerge. And if we create the right partnerships to tackle societal and global challenges, then we'll be able to tackle these ever evolving problems together. And so that's why I believe that it is so important to work across sectors. We don't do that very well in public health. We're very siloed. First of all, within public health, different departments don't talk to each other. And secondly, beyond public health, we don't talk to the private sector as if it's part of the solution, only as if it's part of the problem. And same thing in Lebanon, you had the siloing between like charity and commerce, and I loved the notion of partnering across civil society, private sector, academia, government, and that's how you really change systems. And so my time building Al Fanad in Lebanon, and even continuing to support our investees and the teams after I handed over to the person who succeeded me as country director and grew it even more after that, um, really helped me see firsthand the limitations of working in your own silos and the opportunities of bringing people in and helping them be part of the solution, not just part of the problem.
And through your time at Al Fanar, Lebanon, I mean, of course, as you mentioned, you learned a lot, especially about social entrepreneurship, so much so that you ended up writing a book called Social Entrepreneurship: Building Impact Step by Step. And in this book, you describe a 10-stage framework in building a social in terms of building a social venture. And so what are those 10 stages, and what stage do you find people struggle with the most, and why?
Great question. So, for those listeners who have not heard the 10 stages, I'll review them real quick. Um, the first one is defining the problem and researching the problem. Um, I actually think this is the hardest part, but I'll share the rest. And it's really coming up with a specific problem statement. Like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? A lot of people don't know where to start, and just learning as much as you can about it. The second one is talking to people, or rather, listening to people who are experiencing this problem, who are trying to work to solve this problem, who have historical knowledge and experience in it, because you're not the first person that wanted to solve it. Actually, maybe that's the hardest one. People aren't great at listening. The third one is designing an offering. And people think this is the hardest part, but it's not. The reason they think it's the hardest part is they skip straight to it when it's really the first stuff that's the hardest. And people skip to it with good intention, right? They have rage that this problem is still not solved and that it exists and there's so much injustice in this world. And they're like, I don't have time to research. I need to take action, 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 which is, it's true that you need to take action. But the first step in taking action is that you need to learn everything there is to learn about this problem, and you need to experience it firsthand, or at least be working very closely with those who are experiencing it firsthand. And once you do that, the offering that you are going to contribute will emerge. It will no longer be this like unreachable abstract thing where you think you need to scratch your head until you reach it. It will emerge from those conversations, from that experience, those experiences. And I use the word offering on purpose because people like to say solution. It's not a solution. You're not going to solve this problem. No one organization or offering or design is going to solve this problem. But you get to figure out what can be your contribution and what you can offer to the collective body of knowledge and action against this problem. And so that's step 3 is designing your offering. Step 4 is developing it further, understanding what are the alternatives, where does yours fit in, how will the customers or end users interface with your idea, what is their feedback on it, things like that. And then the 5th step is setting your vision of success. What does success look like and how will you measure it? Which is kind of tricky in social change because in commercial ventures, success is very easy to measure based on the currency, right? Like how many dollars have I made? How many customers do I have? But in social change, it depends on the problem you're trying to solve and your approach. And so if you succeed in 5, 10, 20 years, what will happen? Describe to me how the world will be different. And what is the theory of change that links your idea to getting from here to there, from the problem to your vision of success? So that's the first half. And then the second half is step 6 is the financial viability. So who's paying for this? Where's the money coming from? How much does it cost? Are you going to be able to break even? Are you going to be able to generate surplus? If yes, you might have the opportunity to be for profit. If not, you need to be a nonprofit. And what are the operational efficiencies that you will use to help lower costs and increase viability? And then number 7 is funding. So then now that you know your costs and revenues, how are you going to fuel that? How are you going to launch it and sustain yourself until the point where you reach some kind of equilibrium in your finances? And then structuring. So by then you'll know if you're for profit or nonprofit, and you have different opportunities to you in terms of legal registration, depending on the country that you're in terms of internal structuring, like having the board and the team and what roles and institutional memory and processes will help you tighten up your ship. And then communications and partnering, like how are you going to pitch this and present this? And not only to just present your business plan to investors or funders, but also to other stakeholders and collaborators that you need to succeed. And lastly, how will you expand your impact? What are some pathways to policy or partnership or thinking beyond just your idea and your organization? Um, so that you can use your offering as a platform also to advocate for policy change, to think, I like to use the words not only social entrepreneurship, but intrapreneurship. You don't have to start your own organization. You can do this within an existing institution most of the time. And also extrapreneurship, which means how can you think beyond one institution at a time? Whether it's your startup or an existing institution, how can you innovate beyond the boundaries of multiple institutions? And that really goes back to the partnership for the goals. And so when you break it down into these 10 stages, it seems less daunting because you just think about the step that you're in for now. And you just start by figuring out what problem you're trying to solve, learning as much as you can about it, listening to people, and then you take baby steps as you go. And the beginning steps are the hardest. And I will say one disclaimer, it's not linear. It's not like one check, two check, three check. You keep going back. It's very iterative and cyclical.
And I think it's very, very important to emphasize how critical those first couple of steps are because, for example, with me, when I was developing an app, without interviewing the unhoused community in New York City, I wouldn't know what is actually the problem.
Yeah.
You know, the problems that need to be solved within social entrepreneurship, whether it's housing or public health or education, there are these huge terms that have many different angles that you can solve them with. You can solve housing by making more houses. You can solve housing by connecting people to pantries and there an infinite amount of solutions that one can come up with. And what the point is, what do the people need? Human centered design, which is what we're trying to get at, is what how can we best serve the customer that we are trying to make this offering for. And that, I think, is the best sort of way to really start your venture.
Yes, and I will add to that because human-centered design can mean many things and can also be used in an extractive way. So many commercial ventures use human-centered design to solve a problem for the customer, but then also want to extract from the customer, right? And just make as much money as possible, which is fine if you're selling a fancy pair of shoes or a scarf or whatever. That's business. But when you are working in community on collective action to change systems for a really sticky problem, you need more than human-centered design. And one framework that really resonated with me, I wonder if I have the book here since I'm in my office. I do have the book and I can show you. So this is my social entrepreneurship book, Building Impact Step by Step. And this is a book I refer to in my Coursera course called Design Justice, Community-Led Practices to Build the Worlds We Need. And design justice means who gets to design. It's not just who are you designing for and around, but who gets to design, who gets to innovate, who gets to be funded. And are you doing this in a way that's building power for you, or are you doing it in a way that's building power for others? Are you just getting resources for your own ideas, or are you getting resources for lived experience leaders? And there's actually a design justice network that has 10 principles. And they talk about using design to sustain, heal, and empower communities, center the voices of those who are directly impacted, prioritize design's impact on the community over the intentions of the designer. Like intentions are just not enough. And there's so many examples in international development, especially where well-intentioned people or donors created something that just didn't have the impact that they thought it would, or that might even have had negative unintended consequences. Um, so design justice means viewing change as emergent from an accountable, accessible, and collaborative process rather than as a point at the end of the process. That means that it's not just creating the social outcome, it's the process you used. They see the role of the designer as a facilitator rather than an expert and believe that everyone is an expert based on their own lived experience. Also about sharing design knowledge and tools, empowering others to design, working towards sustainable, community-led, and controlled outcomes, and working towards non-exploitative solutions that reconnect us to the earth and to each other. And lastly, before seeking new design solutions, we look for what is already working at the community level. We honor and uplift traditional, indigenous, and local knowledge and practices. So those are the Design Justice Network principles. And this book was documented by Sasha Costanza Chalk. And really the author refers to um, refers to the work of others, even in writing this book, and references the work of others. I'm
And
trying to
something I think
find the reference for the last, there was a citation. Um, but yeah, so it's more than human-centered design, it's also design justice.
and something I think is very important, both in I'm sure it's apparent in design justice and in your book and in your Coursera course as well, is the social entrepreneurship mindset. You know, entrepreneurship is not just business, it's not just creation, it's a mindset. And so could you describe what is the social entrepreneurship mindset to you and why is it so important?
Yeah, it's really, it's really that shift from being trained in the way things are today, like I was in my public health training, to challenging yourself to think about why things are the way today and how they might be different. And that involves giving yourself permission to see the problem, giving yourself permission to see yourself as part of the solution, and to have a vision for how things might be different, and to think about how you might mobilize others towards that vision. So it's a mindset and a skill set because doing that requires certain skills. And you can acquire both that mindset, which is basically agency, like seeing yourself as an agent for change, and that skill set, which is like captured in the 10 stage framework helps you do that.
And how do you reconcile the tension between structure and creativity, between frameworks and the messiness that comes with real world change?
Yeah, that is a really great question because any framework is just like whatever, it's words and numbers. It helps you get started, it helps you get organized, but things never turn out the way you think they're going to. Even when you set out to do something, it always turns out completely different from what you thought. And it's very important not to think that you can control the process and that you can control the outcome. You can't. And it's actually one thing I tell my students on the first day of class every year is you are going to fail. So let me just take that pressure off your shoulders. Most of the things you're going to attempt in life, not even just in entrepreneurship, are going to fail by definition. And so your job isn't to go out there and solve all the world's problems because you can't, like no one person can. But what this course is about and what this book is about is helping people realize that even in today's world where there are so many really scary challenges and complications, there are good people out there doing good work. And you get to decide to what degree and how you are going to be part of doing that work. You get to decide how you're going to spend your time while you're here on earth and what you want to be part of working towards. And that I think removes some pressure. And the path is going to look so different for everyone. Again, the 10 stage framework just helps you get started and organizing information and taking the first steps. So I think that structure helps, but you also just need to know that it's going to be messy and that you can't control it. And honestly, most of us are trained in the opposite way, right? We're trained ever since we're little. You sit at your desk, you keep your head down. The harder you work, the more number of hours you put in, the more you'll succeed. But it is not like that in social entrepreneurship and creating social change. So I'm really glad that you pointed that out.
And in terms of what you work towards in social entrepreneurship, in your teaching, you mentioned connecting your impact to something personal. You want to work towards something that you're either, you know, currently experiencing or you've dealt with, someone experiencing with a very, sort of firsthand or secondhand experience, as that gives you the best sort of view and angle to quote unquote attack that problem or, create an offering. And so how do you help students connect their personal purpose with systemic impact?
Yeah, it's not even about connecting your personal purpose because even that can sometimes feel like a barrier or like an obstacle, like, oh, I have to figure out my purpose. It's more that in figuring out your contribution, you will be most useful if you're working on something that you're the customer for. Like, what are the things that you have struggled through that you wished there was a better way? work on that. And I'll share some examples from this semester. I taught a case-based public health entrepreneurship course. I just finished teaching it very recently. And as I reflected back on all the cases that we discussed and some of the case protagonists who came in and discussed them with us, all of them basically were their own ideal customer. So I mentioned design justice. I first heard this term when Ashley Wisdom visited my class, and she's the founder of a venture capital backed for profit startup called Health in Her Hue. And this is a digital health technology, it's a website serving Black women. Because as a Black woman with a master's in public health and a really great job in New York working in a hospital, she was not able to find culturally relevant care. Um, to be specific, she had all these like hives all over her body, and she went to the doctors, so many doctors, dermatology, allergy, immunology, and they did all these expensive tests and couldn't figure out the problem. And the moment she quit her job, the hives went away. And at no point did a doctor ask her, have you been experiencing any racism or any microaggressions? Do you have a toxic work environment? And when I was chatting to students and alumni here, it was actually alumni weekend right after she visited. There was a Black woman that was like, "Oh yeah, stress hives. We all get stress hives." I was like, "Okay, like if the doctor was a Black woman, she might have thought of those questions." Ashley always makes it a point to say it's not her goal or her desire for the providers to always be Black women. It's for the providers to to understand what Black women's realities are and serve them in a culturally competent way. So that is the dream. What Health in Her Hue does is it helps women connect with culturally relevant providers. So Health in Her Hue finds it's like a database of culturally relevant healthcare providers that are trusted by them. And then the idea is for women to go to that database and connect with a doctor through them. They also have content for women to read about problems they're facing in their health. And they have community. They have like care squads where they connect with other women facing the same problems. And the theory of change is that by focusing on that trust issue and on that culturally relevant care, Black women will access the healthcare system more frequently and earlier on in their health journey so that their outcomes will be better and their costs will be lower. That's how they were able to get venture capital because she solved a problem she was going through. Another example, and they're actually good friends, these two entrepreneurs, as it happens, I found out after the fact, who visited just a few weeks ago, is Ivelisse Andino, who was raised by an immigrant mother from Puerto Rico and whose mother died when she was in her early 20s. And, so in her late teens, her mom was diagnosed with cancer, and she was helping her mom navigate Medicaid and navigate the US healthcare system. And her mom had a really good job at the time, but she was on Medicaid because her job was new. And so I believe was just like trying to figure it out and help her mom navigate it. And she felt so alone. And so after her mom died and she was exploring various, you know, forms of knowledge, at the time she was working on like tech startups, building apps for health and everything. Um, and she learned about restorative justice circles from a friend who was working with returning citizens, with formerly incarcerated people. And so she started thinking, why don't we have these kinds of circles, like using these indigenous practices for health to help people navigate the healthcare system? So her tagline, her company is called Radical Health. It's a public benefit corporation, which is a specific type of legal registration for a for-profit business. It was the first public benefit corporation in the state of New York. And their tagline is, you don't have to health alone. So they have these indigenous circle practices. It was started right before the pandemic, so it actually ended up being a Zoom thing, which works even better for scalability. And their model evolved over time. So it's not only connecting directly with patients and communities who are mostly immigrants and people of color, but also they started getting government clients, like people in the New York City Department of Health, Department of Education, Department of Public Safety reached out to them for training. Like, how can we have more empathy and better communication and guide our communities and our customers and citizens better? So that ended up being her main driver of revenue so that she could offer the circles, without making people pay. And so again, she designed what she wished she had. And and so that's what I always invite my students to think about. Like, what do you wish you had in the past? And what are the things that you struggled through where you might be able to help others?
And that is a key theme in your Coursera course, Creating Change Through Social
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship. And I want to focus a bit on that course. What inspired you to make it?
What inspired me to make it is that when I wrote the second edition of my textbook, the publishing house priced it at like 50 or 60 something dollars. And I was like, wow, I mean, I'm not even practicing what I'm preaching because it's not accessible to most people, right? And in the book, I talk about a framework that I used in public health, or that I learned in public health. It's a rights-based approach to public health. And in human rights, we say that when you're offering something, you need to make it available, accessible, acceptable, and of high quality. So it needs to meet the triple AQ checklist. This probably rings a bell to you. And so I'm making this book available, but am I making it accessible? Affordability is an aspect of accessibility. Most people can't pay this money. So I was like, how am I gonna increase access and affordability? Um, and that's when I thought, why not just make a bunch of videos where I tell people what's in the book? And if they can afford to buy the book, they will, because it's awesome to have it as a reference when you're taking the course. And if they can't afford the book, then at least they'll know what's in it and they'll be able to practice it like you did. And so I always look back and say, like, this was one of the best things about coming to Yale is that I got the opportunity to work with the Yale Center for Teaching and Learning, um, who partner with Coursera to create open online courses. And at the time, there was an option to take this course for free on Coursera. Very recently, Coursera changed that, and I think they're making people pay from now on. So Yale actually took all the videos and put them on YouTube, so people can still access them for free. And they made them even shorter because I think people who watch YouTube like even shorter videos. So now, like each module, like if it was a 7-minute videos, it will be like 3.5 minute videos or something like that. So I hope that people will just check them out on YouTube and watch part or all of it and scroll through and see what aspects resonate the most. Even in the book, I always say you don't have to read this cover to cover. Like just skip to the part that's most helpful to you. Like listen to the intro or read the intro and then see what are you thinking about? Do you want to learn how to pitch? Go to that video, right? Do you want to learn how to email someone that you've never met and ask them for an informational interview? Go to that video. So I hope people will use it in this really interactive way. And at the end, there's a series of campus conversations where for every module, for every one of the 10 stages, I have a conversation on camera with someone on campus. Usually it was a guest speaker who came to talk in my class, or a former student or mentee or a community member who talks about their experience in that part of the 10 stages, like raising funds or pitching or listening and talking to community members. So I really love those. And if people run out, if they watch all 10 campus conversations and they want more, I invite them also to check out my podcast, which is called Impact and Innovation. And that's where I interview the people who come speak in my class at Yale, the people who we write cases about, and so that more people can be included in those conversations beyond just who's within those classroom walls. So for me, the motivation is just about increasing access, right? To be in my classroom at Yale, you takes a certain amount of privilege. Even though 1 in 5 Yale students comes from poverty and is fully funded, which is unique. That's a high percentage, 20%. And most of my students, all 3 of my TAs this semester are children of immigrants. Like their parents, they didn't grow up with parents who speak English and know how to navigate college prep and all these things. And so But still, they are the lucky ones, and not everyone can get here. So I'm highly motivated by, you know, everything I do here. I don't want it to stop here. I want it to be available to anyone who can benefit from it. And that's why I made the podcast. Also, just because I think that the people that I teach about and who come to my class are just so cool. And it's kind of a waste. Like they're spending half a day or a whole day just to talk to 50 students. Like I want to share their story more broadly. And same with the YouTube videos or the Coursera course. It's just like I put so much work into writing this book and most people won't read it. So I hope that they'll at least watch a video, if not all of them.
And how do you think open access education can shift global participation in social innovation?
I think that it can remove barriers. So we don't want only privileged people with MBAs or MPHs having all the great ideas and getting all the funding and support to implement their ideas. We want community leaders and lived experience leaders to be saying, here's what needs to be done, here's why we should be the ones doing it, and here's why you should be paying us. And to the degree that the content and the mindset and skill set in these resources, in these open online courses, helps those community leaders or young people around the world, even if they're not community leaders yet, but just like people who want to make a difference, I think it just increases access to information, ideas, knowledge, networks that can just help people get started. And I think it can help with that internal change that needs to happen to see yourself as like, I can do this. I see how things could be different, and it's not crazy for me to think that I can actually be part of that.
And what are some memorable learner stories or examples of people who've taken your course, both on Coursera or just at Yale, and applied it in unexpected ways?
Well, I think you're an example. That's why I replied when you reached out and told me about your work. And I'm really happy that it helped you pitch your work that supports the unhoused and get support for it. Um, I also met with someone local here in Connecticut who was working in a family business and kind of wanted to take it to the next level. And he's now applying for a scholarship to do a program here and learn some more and work on it. And I love hearing from people in countries that I've never been to, like someone reached out from Madagascar and someone reached out from Australia and New Zealand and South Africa and Jordan. And it was just really cool to see that this information and ideas are spreading in a way that's, more spreadable than these books, right? And so it's been really cool. One of my mentees here, many of my mentees here and my students come back and speak in my class. A student who took my public health entrepreneurship course a few years ago came back to teach the semester a framework that she had created on entrepreneurship, how you can create change within an existing job and an existing organization. Another one created a global mental health nonprofit that did a lot of partnering across sectors and came back to teach about her framework for public-private partnership. Her organization is called Start Brio, and both of them participated in my podcast. So they can share their work more broadly, and you all listeners and viewers can hear their stories if you check out the podcast. So the entrepreneurship framework was on this season of the podcast. It's a Victoria Bush, the three C's of entrepreneurship, and then the other one is Daisy Rosales, and it's Start Brio. I also want to say I'm starting a new project called Listening for Change with a close friend who has now become an academic collaborator. And we're going to it's kind of like taking the podcast to the world in the sense that we're going to travel around and talk to people and film the interviews, people working in more remote areas, especially those working to conserve and preserve nature and conserve and preserve indigenous practices that will help us better care for people and planet. So I'm really excited about that. I'm going to Sikkim in North Southeast India in like 10 days to visit an organization called Ahana, which supports entrepreneurs in underinvested areas. And then I'll be in Vietnam a couple of months later, supporting a few different, interviewing a few different social enterprises. And so I'm even out there to learn more about these examples and the ways that people are just finding a way to continue creating change, even in today's world, to elevate their stories, to learn from myself, to help others learn from each other, and hopefully even connect with each other. Because we have so many stories now about how things are being destroyed or held back. And I think we need more stories about how people are still fighting the fight and getting results.
And if every listener took one small step toward social entrepreneurship after this conversation, what would you want that first step to be?
I would want that first step to be understanding that you already have it in you. Whatever it takes, whatever answer you're looking for in terms of your change making journey, it's already in you. It's not something elusive that you need to go to Yale to reach or that you need to figure out, this mysterious answer. You already have what it takes. You have the lived experience and the knowledge and the desire to contribute something. It's already there. You just need to look inside and get started.
Well, thank you so much, Teresa, for coming on my podcast with me. It's been an
Thank you,
amazing.
Vedant. I'm so happy you took my course. I'm so happy you're working with the unhoused. I can't wait to learn more about your work. And it's truly been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much.